Maria Rodriguez looked up at the tall gray building in front of her. The family court building seemed bigger than she remembered from her visit last month. She held her daughter Sophia's small hand tightly as they walked toward the entrance. "Mama, why do we have to go here again?" Sophia asked, looking up with her big brown eyes. "We need to talk to a judge about some important things," Maria said softly. "Remember what I told you? You'll sit quietly while Mama talks to the judge." Sophia nodded. At 6 years old, she didn't understand much about courts or judges, but she knew her mama seemed worried lately. Maria had been staying up late at night, reading thick books and writing notes. Sometimes Sophia would find her mama asleep at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. They walked through the metal detector at the entrance. The security guard looked at them briefly and waved them through. Maria carried a large folder, filled with papers she had organized and reorganized many times. She had spent weeks preparing for this day. The lobby was full of people. Some wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases. Others looked more like Maria, dressed in their best clothes but clearly not wealthy. Children sat quietly next to their parents. Everyone seemed nervous or worried. Maria found the information desk and waited in line. When it was her turn, she spoke to the clerk. "I'm here for a hearing in family court. My name is Maria Rodriguez." The clerk, a tired-looking woman with gray hair, barely looked up from her computer screen. "Case number?" Maria read the number from a paper she had ready. The clerk typed it in and printed out a small slip of paper. "Courtroom 3B, second floor. Be there by 9:30. "Thank you," Maria said, but the clerk was already helping the next person. Maria and Sophia took the elevator to the second floor. The hallway was long and filled with people sitting on benches outside different courtrooms. Some people talked quietly with lawyers. Others sat alone, looking through papers or staring at their phones. Maria found courtroom 3B and saw the list of cases posted on the wall outside. Her name was there along with her ex-husband's name, Carlos Martinez. The sight of his name still made her stomach feel tight. They had been divorced for 2 years now, but he was trying to change their custody agreement. He wanted Sophia to live with him most of the time instead of just on weekends. Maria and Sophia sat on a wooden bench outside the courtroom. Maria opened her folder and looked through her papers one more time. She had copies of everything: school, records showing Sophia's good grades, doctor's reports showing she was healthy and happy, and letters from Sophia's teachers saying she was doing well. Maria had also written a long letter explaining why Sophia should stay with her. She had practiced reading it out loud many times. Her hands shook a little as she held the papers. She was nervous about speaking in front of a judge. "Look, Mama," Sophia whispered, pointing to a woman walking by. "She's wearing a pretty dress." The woman was indeed wearing an expensive-looking dress with matching shoes and jewelry. She carried a designer purse and walked confidently toward one of the courtrooms. She was followed by a man in a suit who was clearly her lawyer. Maria looked down at her own clothes. She wore a navy blue dress she had bought at a discount store for $30. It was clean and neat, but it wasn't fancy. Her shoes were comfortable but old. She carried her papers in a plain folder she had bought at the grocery store. For a moment, Maria felt embarrassed about how she looked compared to some of the other people here. But then she reminded herself that what mattered was Sophia's well-being, not expensive clothes. A door opened and people started walking into courtroom 3B. Maria gathered her papers and stood up. "Come on, sweetheart. It's time to go in." They walked into the courtroom together. Maria had never been in a real courtroom before. It was smaller than she had expected but still felt very official and serious. There were rows of wooden seats, like church pews. At the front was a tall desk where the judge would sit. An American flag stood in one corner. Maria chose a seat in the third row. Sophia sat next to her, swinging her legs since they didn't quite reach the floor. Maria opened her folder again and made sure all her papers were in the right order. Other people filled the seats around them. Some had lawyers who whispered instructions to them. Maria wished she could afford a lawyer, but she had spent all her savings just to take time off work for this hearing. She had done her research, though. For weeks, she had gone to the public library after work and on weekends. She had read books about family law and looked up cases similar to hers on the computer. She had taken careful notes and learned the proper words to use in court. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, had been very helpful. She had shown Maria how to use the legal databases and had even let her print pages for free when Maria's printing money ran out. "You're very dedicated," Mrs. Chen had said one evening when Maria was there past closing time. "Your daughter is lucky to have a mother who works so hard for her." Now sitting in the courtroom, Maria hoped all that work would pay off. She knew the law was on her side. Sophia was happy and healthy living with her. She had a stable home and was doing well in school. There was no good reason to change the custody arrangement. Carlos had remarried 6 months ago. His new wife, Jennifer, didn't have children of her own and seemed to think she could be a better mother to Sophia than Maria. But Sophia barely knew Jennifer. When Sophia came back from weekend visits with her father, she sometimes seemed confused and sad. The courtroom was filling up now. Maria saw her ex-husband Carlos sitting on the other side of the room with his lawyer. He was wearing a new suit and expensive watch. His lawyer was a well-dressed woman who looked confident and experienced. Carlos caught Maria's eye and nodded slightly. They weren't enemies exactly, but things between them had become complicated since his remarriage. Jennifer had strong opinions about how Sophia should be raised, and Carlos seemed to go along with whatever she wanted. A door at the front of the courtroom opened, and everyone stood up. Maria quickly stood too, pulling Sophia up beside her. She felt her heart beating faster. This was it. After weeks of preparation, the hearing was about to begin. The judge would decide what was best for Sophia. Maria believed strongly that Sophia belonged with her, and she was ready to fight for her daughter. She had prepared carefully, and she knew she was in the right. But as she stood there in her discount store dress holding her grocery store folder, surrounded by lawyers in expensive suits, Maria couldn't help feeling a little scared. She was about to represent herself in court against a trained lawyer. She hoped her preparation would be enough. Sophia looked up at her with trusting eyes. That gave Maria the strength she needed. Whatever happened, she would do her best for her daughter. Judge William Harrison walked into his courtroom with slow, heavy steps. At 58 years old, he had been a judge for over 20 years. He was used to his routine. Every morning, he put on his black robe, drank his coffee, and prepared to make decisions about people's lives. Judge Harrison was a tall man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. He wore expensive glasses and always kept his back straight. People said he was fair, but those who knew him well understood that he had strong opinions about how people should live their lives. He believed in traditional families. He thought, mothers should stay home with their children and fathers should work to support them. He didn't like it when families broke apart, and he especially didn't like it when people came to his court without lawyers. As he sat down at his high desk, Judge Harrison looked out at the courtroom. It was full of people waiting for their cases to be heard. He could tell right away who had money and who didn't. The rich people sat with their expensive lawyers. The poor people sat alone, looking nervous and confused. Judge Harrison's assistant handed him a stack of files for the morning's cases. He opened the first one and read quickly, Rodriguez versus Martinez, a custody modification case. The father wanted to change the custody arrangement for his 6-year-old daughter. The judge looked at the papers. The mother, Maria Rodriguez, was representing herself. No lawyer. That usually meant she didn't have much money. The father had hired Sarah Wilson, one of the best family lawyers in the city. That told Judge Harrison a lot about this case. He had seen cases like this many times before. Usually when a poor mother came to court without a lawyer, she was trying to get more child support money. Or maybe she was an unfit mother, and the father was trying to protect the child. Judge Harrison believed that people with money were usually more responsible and better parents. Call the first case, Judge Harrison said to his clerk. Rodriguez versus Martinez, the clerk announced. Maria stood up, her hand shaking slightly as she gathered her papers. Sophia walked beside her to the front of the courtroom. They sat at a table on one side. Carlos and his lawyer sat at the table on the other side. Judge Harrison looked at Maria for the first time. He saw her cheap dress and old shoes. He noticed her simple folder and the way she nervously arranged her papers. He saw the little girl sitting quietly beside her. In his mind, Judge Harrison quickly created a picture of Maria. She was probably a single mother who worked at a low-paying job. Maybe she cleaned houses or worked in a restaurant. She probably lived in a small apartment and struggled to pay her bills. She was likely asking for more money from her ex-husband, or maybe fighting to keep custody so she wouldn't lose the child. Support payments. Judge Harrison had seen hundreds of women like this over the years. They came to his court poorly dressed and unprepared. They tried to represent themselves because they couldn't afford lawyers. Most of them didn't understand the law and wasted his time with emotional speeches instead of legal arguments. He looked at Carlos and his lawyer. Carlos wore a nice suit and looked confident. His lawyer was professional and well-prepared. This told Judge Harrison that Carlos had probably made something of himself after the divorce. Maybe he had a good job now, or perhaps he had married someone who could help provide a stable home for the child. "State your names for the record," Judge Harrison said, his voice stern and official. "Carlos Martinez, Your Honor," said the father. "Sarah Wilson, representing Mr. Martinez," said the lawyer. Judge Harrison looked at Maria and waited. She stood up quickly. "Maria Rodriguez, Your Honor, I'm representing myself." Judge Harrison nodded, but his expression showed what he thought about self-representation. "Ms. Rodriguez, I see you don't have legal counsel. Are you sure you want to proceed? Without a lawyer?" The way he asked the question made it sound like Maria was making a foolish choice. Several people in the courtroom shifted in their seats, sensing the judge's disapproval. "Yes, Your Honor. I've prepared carefully for this hearing," Maria said. Judge Harrison looked doubtful. In his experience, people who said they were prepared usually meant they had watched some TV shows about lawyers or read a few things on the internet. He didn't expect much from Maria's presentation. "Very well," he said. "Mr. Martinez is requesting a modification of the current custody arrangement. Ms. Wilson, please present your client's case." The lawyer stood up smoothly. She was confident and spoke clearly. She explained that Carlos had remarried and could now provide a more stable home for Sofia. She said Carlos had a good job and his new wife could stay home to take care of Sofia properly. "Your Honor," the lawyer continued, "Mr. Martinez can provide educational opportunities and experiences that the child is not currently receiving. He lives in a better neighborhood with excellent schools. His new wife has experience with children and can provide the kind of full-time attention that every child deserves." Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. This was the kind of logical, well-organized argument he liked to hear. The lawyer was professional and made good points about stability and opportunities. While the lawyer spoke, Judge Harrison watched Maria out of the corner of his eye. He saw her writing notes frantically, probably trying to keep up with legal terms she didn't understand. He noticed how she whispered something to her daughter when the little girl started to fidget. The judge had already started to form his opinion. Here was a responsible father who had improved his life and wanted to give his daughter better opportunities. And here was a struggling single mother who probably worked long hours and couldn't give the child proper attention. When Carlos's lawyer finished, Judge Harrison turned to Maria. "Ms. Rodriguez, you may present your case." Maria stood up, holding her papers. Judge Harrison could see her hands shaking slightly. He leaned back in his chair, already expecting to hear an emotional plea rather than a legal argument. This was going to be a long morning, Judge Harrison thought to himself. He had little patience for people who came to his court unprepared and wasted everyone's time. He looked at the clock on the wall and hoped Maria wouldn't take too long with whatever speech she had prepared. Judge Harrison prided himself on being able to read people quickly. He believed his 20 years of experience had taught him to spot the truth right away. Looking at Maria in her discount store clothes, holding her grocery store folder, he was confident he understood exactly what kind of person she was. He didn't know that his assumptions were about to be completely wrong. He didn't know that Maria had spent weeks studying law books and legal cases. He didn't know about her late nights at the library or her careful preparation. Most importantly, Judge Harrison didn't know that Maria Rodriguez was nothing like what she appeared to be. He was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous assumption is the one that seems most obvious. As Maria began to speak, Judge Harrison settled into his chair, ready to listen politely before making what he thought would be an easy decision. He had no idea that this case was about to become one of the most embarrassing moments of his career. The morning sun shone through the courtroom windows, casting long shadows across the floor. In that light, Judge Harrison sat confidently behind his high desk, completely unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down by the woman in the $30 dress standing before him. Maria took a deep breath and began to speak. She had practiced this moment many times in front of her bathroom mirror at home. She knew exactly what she wanted to say. Your Honor, I believe the current custody arrangement is working very well. For Sophia, she is happy, healthy, and doing excellent in school. I have documentation to show. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Harrison interrupted, his voice sharp. Before you begin, let me ask you something. Do you have a job? Maria paused, surprised by the interruption. Yes, Your Honor. I work full-time. And what kind of work do you do? Judge Harrison asked, leaning forward in his chair. His tone suggested he already knew the answer wouldn't impress him. I work in the legal field, Your Honor, Maria said carefully. Judge Harrison raised his eyebrows and made a small laughing sound. The legal field? What exactly does that mean? Are you a secretary? At a law office, do you file papers? Some people in the courtroom looked uncomfortable. Carlos's lawyer shifted in her seat. Even Carlos looked surprised by the judge's tone. Your Honor, I'd prefer to focus on what's best for Sophia, Maria said, trying to stay calm. I have evidence that shows. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Harrison interrupted again. I'm trying to understand your situation so I can make the best decision for this child. Now you say you work in the legal field. Are you a paralegal? Do you answer phones at a law office? Maria felt her cheeks getting warm. She could hear the disrespect in the judge's voice. Your Honor, I am qualified to represent myself in this matter. I've prepared extensively. I'm sure you have, Judge Harrison said with a smirk. Let me guess. You've been watching lawyer shows on TV? Maybe you looked up some things on Google? A few people in the courtroom gasped quietly. This was not how judges usually spoke to people in court, even people without lawyers. Sophia looked up at her mother with worried eyes. She could tell something was wrong even though she didn't understand what was happening. Maria felt her anger rising, but she forced herself to stay calm. Your Honor, I have studied the relevant laws and cases. I understand my rights and Sophia's rights. If I may continue with my presentation, your rights. Judge Harrison laughed out loud this time. Ms. Rodriguez, with all due respect, I doubt you understand much about rights or laws. People like you often think they know more than they actually do. The words hung in the air. People like you. Everyone in the courtroom understood what the judge meant. He was talking about poor people, people without fancy clothes or expensive lawyers. Carlos looked down at his hands. Even though he wanted to win custody of Sophia, he felt embarrassed by the judge's behavior. This wasn't right. Maria's hands were shaking now, but not from nervousness. She was angry, very angry. But she knew that losing her temper would only make things worse for Sophia. Your Honor, she said slowly, I request that you allow me to present my case as is my right under the law. Judge Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Fine, go ahead. But please try to stick to facts, not emotions. I don't have time for crying and begging. Maria had not been crying or begging. She had been trying to present a logical legal argument, but Judge Harrison had already decided what kind of person she was. Thank you, Your Honor, Maria said. She looked down at her papers and began again. Sophia has lived with me since our divorce 2 years ago. During this time, she has maintained excellent grades, has had perfect attendance at school, and has shown no signs of emotional distress. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Harrison interrupted yet again. How many hours a day do you work? That's not relevant. I'll decide what's relevant in my courtroom, Judge Harrison snapped. Answer the question. I work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, Maria said. And who takes care of Sophia while you're at work? She's in school during most of my work hours. After school, she goes to an excellent after-school program at the YMCA. Judge Harrison shook his head. So this child spends her days at school and her afternoons at daycare while you're at work. Meanwhile, Mr. Martinez can provide a stable home with a full-time mother figure. Your Honor, millions of working parents provide excellent care for their children. The after-school program Sophia attends has certified teachers and, Ms. Rodriguez, please don't lecture me about parenting, Judge Harrison said coldly. I have been dealing with family cases for over 20 years. I know what children need. Maria felt like she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Every time she tried to make a point, the judge cut her off or twisted her words. Now, Judge Harrison continued, let's talk about your living situation. What kind of neighborhood do you live in? We live in a safe, clean apartment complex with good schools nearby. Apartment complex, Judge Harrison repeated, as if the words tasted bad. And Mr. Martinez lives in a house in Westfield, correct? With good schools and a yard for the child to play in? Your Honor, our current home meets all of Sophia's needs. She has her own room, we live close to her school, and, Ms. Rodriguez, I'm trying to determine what's in the best interest of this child. Clearly, a house with a yard is better than an apartment. Clearly, a full-time mother is better than daycare. These are simple facts. Judge Harrison was not looking at any of Maria's papers. He was not considering the evidence she had brought. He had made up his mind based on how she looked and where she lived. Your Honor, Maria said, her voice getting stronger. With respect, you haven't looked at any of the documentation I've prepared. I have letters from Sophia's teachers, reports from her doctors, evidence of her academic achievements. Ms. Rodriguez, I don't need papers to tell me what I can see with my own eyes. This is a little girl who deserves stability and opportunities. Mr. Martinez can provide those things. Judge Harrison looked at his watch. I think I've heard enough to make my decision. Your Honor, you haven't heard my case, Maria said, standing up. You've spent this entire time making assumptions about me based on my appearance and my income level. This is not how the law works. The courtroom became very quiet. Everyone could feel the tension building. Judge Harrison's face turned red. Ms. Rodriguez, I will not tolerate being lectured about the law by someone who clearly doesn't understand it. If you continue with this attitude, I will hold you in contempt of court. What attitude? Maria asked. Expecting to be treated fairly? Expecting you to follow legal procedures? That's enough, Judge Harrison shouted, banging his gavel hard. You will not tell me how to run my courtroom. People like you think you can come in here and demand special treatment, but that's not how it works. Again, those words. People like you. Everyone in the courtroom knew exactly what Judge Harrison meant. Sophia started to cry quietly. The loud noises and angry voices scared her. Maria immediately sat down and put her arm around her daughter. It's okay, sweetie, Maria whispered. Everything will be okay. But Maria wasn't sure if that was true. This judge had decided against her before she even opened her mouth. He wasn't interested in evidence or facts. He only cared about what he saw when he looked at her. Judge Harrison was breathing heavily, angry that this woman had dared to challenge him. In his mind, Maria was just another poor single mother who thought she knew better than everyone else. He had no idea that he was making the biggest mistake of his career. He didn't know that Maria had more legal knowledge than most of the lawyers who appeared in his courtroom. Most importantly, he didn't know that everything he was doing and saying was about to come back to haunt him in ways he never could have imagined. The morning sun continued to shine through the courtroom windows, but the atmosphere had turned dark and tense. Judge Harrison sat behind his high desk, confident in his authority, completely unaware that his world was about to crumble around him. The tension in the courtroom was thick. Maria could feel every eye watching her. Some people looked sympathetic, while others seemed to agree with the judge's harsh treatment. Sophia continued to cry softly, frightened by the anger and shouting. Maria gently wiped her daughter's tears and spoke quietly to her. Shh, baby. Mama's here. Everything will be okay. Judge Harrison watched this scene with cold eyes. In his mind, Maria was putting on a show, trying to get sympathy by using her child. He had seen this kind of manipulation before, or so he thought. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Harrison said sharply, please control your child. This is a courtroom, not a playground. Maria looked up at him with disbelief. Sophia was a 6-year-old who was scared and confused. Any normal person would understand that. Your Honor, my daughter is frightened by the raised voices. She's just a child. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before bringing her here, Judge Harrison replied. Maybe you should have gotten a babysitter instead of using her as a prop in your case. Gasps could be heard around the courtroom. Even Carlos looked shocked. This was his daughter the judge was talking about so coldly. Maria felt her anger building again, but she forced herself to stay calm. She had come too far to give up now. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and she wasn't going to let this judge's prejudice stop her. Your Honor, I brought Sophia. Because this case is about her future, I believe she has a right to be here when decisions about her life are being made. Ms. Rodriguez, children don't have rights to be in courtrooms. That's another example of how little you understand about legal procedures. Maria's eyes flashed. This was exactly the kind of statement that showed the judge's ignorance, not hers. She knew the law better than he thought. Actually, Your Honor, according to the case of Peterson versus Peterson from the State Supreme Court, children do have the right to be present at custody hearings when their age and maturity level allow them to understand. Stop right there. Judge Harrison's voice boomed through the courtroom. Don't you dare try to quote law to me. I will not sit here and listen to some amateur pretend to be a lawyer. Judge Harrison was furious now. How dare this woman try to cite legal cases to him? He was the judge. He had gone to law school. He had 20 years of experience. Who did she think she was? Ms. Rodriguez, I have had enough of your amateur theatrics. You are wasting this court's time with your pretend legal knowledge. Stop playing lawyer when you clearly have no idea what you're talking about. Maria stood up slowly. Her whole body was shaking, but not from fear. She was shaking from pure anger and frustration. Your Honor, I am not playing anything. I have studied the relevant laws and cases. I know my rights and my daughter's rights. And I know that what you're doing right now is wrong. What I'm doing? Judge Harrison's face was turning red again. What I'm doing is trying to protect a child from an unfit mother who thinks she's smarter than everyone else. The words hit Maria like a punch to the stomach. Unfit mother. After everything she had done for Sophia, after all the sacrifices she had made, this judge was calling her an unfit mother. I am not an unfit mother, Maria said, her voice getting stronger. I have provided Sophia with a loving, stable home. I have made sure she gets excellent grades in school. I have taken her to every doctor's appointment, every parent-teacher conference. I have been there for every scraped knee and every bad dream. Ms. Rodriguez, anyone can make those claims. They're not claims, Maria interrupted. They're facts. I have documentation to prove everything I've said. But you won't look at it because you've already decided who I am based on my clothes and the fact that I can't afford a lawyer. The courtroom was completely silent now. Everyone could feel that. Something big was about to happen. Judge Harrison slowly stood up behind his high desk. He was very angry now, angrier than he had been in years. This woman was challenging his authority in front of a full courtroom. She was embarrassing him, and he would not stand for it. Ms. Rodriguez, I am warning you for the last time. If you continue to disrespect this court and try to tell me how to do my job, I will hold you in contempt. That means you could go to jail. For what? Maria asked. For asking you to follow legal procedures? For expecting you to look at evidence before making a decision? For demanding that my daughter and I be treated with basic respect? For contempt of court, Judge Harrison shouted. For disrupting these proceedings with your ignorant outbursts. There is nothing ignorant about knowing your rights under the law, Maria shot back. And there is nothing ignorant about expecting a judge to be fair and impartial. Judge Harrison was breathing heavily now. In all his years on the bench, no one had ever spoken to him like this, especially not some poor single mother who couldn't even afford proper clothes for court. That's it, he said, reaching for his gavel. I am going to hold you in contempt of court. Bailiff, please step forward. The bailiff, a large man in uniform, moved closer to Maria's table. He looked uncomfortable with the situation, but he had to follow the judge's orders. Sophia saw the big man moving toward her mother and started crying harder. "Mama, don't let them take you." Maria immediately sat down and pulled Sophia close to her. "It's okay, baby, Mama's not going anywhere." But even as she said the words, Maria wasn't sure they were true. This judge seemed determined to punish her for standing up to him. Carlos finally stood up. "Your Honor, if I may speak?" Judge Harrison looked at him with surprise. "Mr. Martinez, this is highly unusual. I know, Your Honor, but this is my daughter we're talking about. She's scared and confused. Maybe we could take a short break?" Judge Harrison glared at Carlos, then at Maria, then at the crying child. The last thing he wanted was for people to think he was being cruel to a little girl. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. But Ms. Rodriguez, when we come back, you will show proper respect for this court or face the consequences." Judge Harrison left the courtroom through his private door, his black robe flowing behind him. The bailiff stepped back and Maria let out a long breath she didn't know she had been holding. People in the courtroom began talking quietly among themselves. Some shook their heads in disapproval, not at Maria, but at the judge's behavior. Carlos walked over to Maria's table. "Maria, I'm sorry, this isn't what I wanted." Maria looked up at him. "Then why don't you tell your lawyer to withdraw the motion? Sophia is happy with me. You know that." Carlos looked back at his lawyer, who was watching them with sharp eyes. "It's complicated," he said quietly. "No, Carlos, it's not complicated. Either you think I'm a good mother or you don't." Before Carlos could answer, his lawyer called him back to their table. Maria was alone again with Sophia, who was still sniffling. From her tears, Maria knew she was in serious trouble. This judge had made up his mind about her, and nothing she said or did was going to change it. But she also knew she was right. She had done nothing wrong except stand up for herself and her daughter. As she sat there during the recess, Maria realized that this case was about much more than custody. It was about dignity and respect. It was about whether people would be judged by their character or by their appearance. She thought about all the other parents who had probably sat in this same courtroom, facing this same judge, without the knowledge or courage to stand up for themselves. How many children had been taken from good parents simply because those parents were poor or looked different? Maria made a decision during that recess. Win or lose, she was going to make sure this judge knew exactly who he was dealing with. She was tired of being treated like she was stupid or worthless. When Judge Harrison returned to his courtroom, he would finally learn the truth about Maria Rodriguez, and that truth was going to change everything. The 15-minute recess felt like hours to Maria. She sat quietly with Sophia, trying to calm her daughter and prepare herself for what would happen next. She knew Judge Harrison was planning to punish her when court resumed. Other people in the courtroom whispered among themselves. Some left to get coffee or use the restroom. A few came over to Maria to offer quiet words of support. "That judge is way out of line," whispered an older woman who was waiting for her own case. "I've never seen anything like it." A young man in a suit leaned over and said softly, "I'm a lawyer, and what he's doing isn't right. You should file a complaint." Maria thanked them, but her mind was focused on what she needed to do next. She had come too far to give up now. Sophia needed her to be strong. During the break, Maria organized her papers one more time. She had brought copies of everything: school records, medical records, character references, financial statements. She had also brought something else, something she hoped she wouldn't need to use. Hidden in the back of her folder were her law school diploma and several legal certificates. She had kept them there as a last resort, not wanting to reveal her background unless absolutely necessary. She preferred to let her arguments speak for themselves, but Judge Harrison had made it clear that he wouldn't listen to her arguments. He had decided she was ignorant and unqualified based on her appearance. Maybe it was time to show him exactly how wrong he was. The bailiff announced that court was back in session. Judge Harrison returned to his high seat looking stern and determined. He had used the break to calm down, but his mind was made up. He was going to teach this woman a lesson about respecting authority. "Ms. Rodriguez," Judge Harrison began, his voice cold and formal. "Before we continue, I want to make something very clear. This is my courtroom and you will follow my rules. Any further outbursts or attempts to argue with me will result in contempt charges. Do you understand?" Maria stood up slowly. "Your Honor, I understand your position, but I need you to understand mine as well." Judge Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Rodriguez, I don't think you heard me clearly. I'm not interested in your position. I'm interested in following proper legal procedures." "Then perhaps you should start following them," Maria said quietly. The courtroom went silent again. Judge Harrison's face began to turn red. "What did you say?" "I said perhaps you should start following proper legal procedures, because nothing you've done this morning has followed standard courtroom protocol." Judge Harrison gripped his gavel tightly. "Ms. Rodriguez, you are in contempt of court. I'm ordering you to—" "On what grounds?" Maria interrupted. "What specific rule have I broken? What law have I violated? You can't hold someone in contempt just because they disagree with you. I can hold you in contempt for disrespecting this court." "Show me the legal precedent," Maria said calmly. "Which case law supports holding someone in contempt for asking you to look at evidence? Which statute says a parent cannot defend themselves in a custody hearing?" Judge Harrison was speechless for a moment. He wasn't used to people challenging him with actual legal questions. "I don't have to explain my decisions to you," he finally said. "Actually, you do," Maria replied. "Under the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, you absolutely do. And under the Equal Protection Clause, you can't treat me differently because of my economic status." Judge Harrison stared at her. Where was this coming from? A few minutes ago, she was just another poor single mother. Now she was quoting constitutional law. "Ms. Rodriguez, stop pretending you understand constitutional law." "I'm not pretending anything," Maria said. She reached into her folder and pulled out a legal document. According to Miranda versus Arizona, every person has the right to fair treatment under the law, regardless of their ability to afford representation. Judge Harrison's mouth fell open slightly. Miranda versus Arizona was a Supreme Court case. How did she know that? Furthermore, Maria continued, pulling out another document, the case of Goldberg versus Kelly established that due process requires a fair hearing before any government action that affects a person's rights. That includes custody decisions. The people in the courtroom began to sit up straighter. Something was happening here that they didn't expect. Carlos looked confused. His lawyer looked surprised. Even the bailiff seemed interested in what Maria was saying. Judge Harrison was becoming nervous. This woman was quoting real cases accurately. This wasn't someone who had watched a few TV shows or read some internet articles. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said slowly, "where exactly did you learn about these cases?" "The same place you did," Maria said, calmly. "Law school." The words hung in the air like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet. "What?" Judge Harrison whispered. Maria reached back into her folder. This time she pulled out several official documents, but as she lifted them, some papers slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor. The bailiff immediately moved to help her pick them up. As he bent down to gather the papers, his eyes grew wide. He handed the documents back to Maria, but not before several people in the courtroom caught a glimpse of what they said. One paper was clearly a diploma. Another looked like an official certificate. A third appeared to be some kind of academic award. Judge Harrison leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Rodriguez, what are those documents?" Maria looked down at the papers in her hands. She had kept this secret for most of the hearing, hoping she wouldn't need to reveal it. But Judge Harrison had forced her hand. "These are my law school records, Your Honor." "Your what?" "My law school records. My diploma, my bar certification, my academic awards." Judge Harrison felt like the floor was falling out from under him. "You're a lawyer?" "Yes, Your Honor. I graduated from Harvard Law School in 2015. I graduated magna cum laude. I was on the law review. I've been practicing law for 8 years. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. People turned to each other with shocked expressions. Carlos looked like he had been hit by a truck. Judge Harrison's face went from red to pale in seconds. Harvard Law School? Yes, Your Honor. Would you like to see my diploma? Maria held up the official document. Even from his high seat, Judge Harrison could see the Harvard Law School seal and the Latin words that indicated highest honors. You've been a practicing lawyer this entire time? Yes, Your Honor. I currently work as a federal public defender. Before that, I was a prosecutor with the district attorney's office for 3 years. Judge Harrison felt sick to his stomach. For the past hour, he had been insulting and humiliating a Harvard-educated lawyer. He had called her ignorant and unqualified. He had suggested she was unfit to raise her child. Why didn't you tell me this at the beginning? He asked weakly. Because my education and profession shouldn't matter, Maria said firmly. Every parent deserves to be treated with respect in this courtroom, whether they're a lawyer or a janitor. Every child deserves to have their case heard fairly, whether their parent went to Harvard or never went to college at all. The truth of her words hit everyone in the courtroom. Judge Harrison had revealed his own prejudices in the worst possible way. Your Honor, Maria continued, I chose to represent myself because this is a personal matter, not a professional one. I'm here, as Sophia's mother, not as a lawyer. But you made assumptions about me based on my appearance and treated me with disrespect that no parent should ever face in a court of law. Judge Harrison sat frozen in his chair. He realized that every word he had said, every insult he had thrown, had been heard by a room full of people, and now they all knew he had been completely wrong about everything. The woman he had dismissed as ignorant was one of the most educated people in the room. The woman he had called unfit was a respected legal professional who dedicated her career to helping others. He had made a fool of himself in front of everyone, and the worst part was that it had all been recorded by the court reporter. Maria stood calmly at her table, holding her Harvard diploma, waiting to see what Judge Harrison would do next. The morning sun still shone through the windows, but everything in the courtroom had changed completely. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Harrison stared at Maria's Harvard diploma as if it might disappear if he looked away. His hands were shaking slightly as the full weight of his mistake became clear to him. Everyone in the courtroom was looking back and forth between the judge and Maria. The atmosphere had completely changed. Suddenly, Judge Harrison was the one who looked foolish and out of place. Maria stood calmly, still holding her diploma and certificates. She wasn't angry anymore. She was in complete control of the situation now, and everyone could feel it. Your Honor, Maria said in a clear, professional voice, now that we've established my qualifications, perhaps we can focus on what really matters. What's best for my daughter Sophia? Judge Harrison cleared his throat nervously. Ms. Rodriguez, that is, perhaps we should. He couldn't finish his sentence. For the first time in 20 years as a judge, he didn't know what to say. Maria set her diploma on the table and picked up her legal documents. Now she spoke with the confidence and authority of the trained lawyer she was. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence regarding Sophia's well-being under the current custody arrangement. As you can see from these school records, Sophia has maintained a 4.0 grade point average throughout first grade. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, has written a letter stating that Sophia is one of the most well-adjusted children in her class. Maria handed a document to the bailiff who passed it to Judge Harrison. This time, the judge actually looked at the paper carefully. Furthermore, Maria continued, these medical records show that Sophia has received all required vaccinations and regular checkups. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, her pediatrician, has noted that Sophia shows no signs of stress or emotional problems. She handed over another document. Judge Harrison read it thoroughly, something he should have done from the beginning. Your Honor, I've also included character references from 3 of my neighbors, Sophia's dance teacher and the director of her after-school program.
All of them describe Sophia as a happy, confident child who speaks lovingly about her home life. Document after document was presented. Each one painted a picture of a child who was thriving under her mother's care. Carlos looked increasingly uncomfortable as he listened to Maria's presentation.
His lawyer was frantically taking notes, probably realizing that their case was falling apart. Now, Maria said, let's discuss the claim that Mr. Martinez can provide better opportunities for Sophia. While it's true that he has remarried and moved to a larger house, proximity to quality education is what matters most for a child's development. Maria pulled out a map and school district information. Sophia currently attends Riverside Elementary, which is rated as one of the top 10 elementary schools in the state. The school Mr. Martinez is proposing, while in a wealthier neighborhood, is actually ranked lower in both academic performance and student satisfaction. Judge Harrison studied the documents. Everything Maria said was backed up with facts and data. Additionally, Maria continued, Sophia has formed strong friendships at her current school and in our neighborhood. Child development experts agree that stability in social relationships is crucial at this age. She presented research from child psychology journals to support her argument. Your Honor, regarding my work schedule, I should clarify that I work as a federal public defender, which allows me considerable flexibility. I'm often able to work from home, and my schedule is designed around Sophia's needs. I attend every school event, every parent conference, and every extracurricular activity. Maria handed over her work schedule and a letter from her supervisor confirming her flexibility. Judge Harrison was amazed. Every argument he had made against Maria was being systematically dismantled with solid evidence and legal reasoning. Now let's address the suggestion that a two-parent household is automatically better for a child, Maria said. While I respect Mr. Martinez's new marriage, psychological research shows that the quality of parenting matters more than the number of parents in the home. She cited several academic studies and court cases that supported single-parent custody when the single parent was providing excellent care. Your Honor, I've been Sophia's primary caregiver since birth. I was present for her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. I know her favorite bedtime story, her biggest fears, and her dreams for the future. This bond cannot be replicated simply by moving her to a different household. Maria's voice was strong and confident, but also filled with genuine love for her daughter. Finally, she said, I'd like to address the elephant in the room. Your Honor, the way you treated me today based on my appearance and perceived economic status was inappropriate and potentially grounds for judicial misconduct. Judge Harrison's face went pale again. However, Maria continued, I'm not here to embarrass you or cause problems for the court system. I'm here to advocate for my daughter. I believe in the legal system, which is why I've dedicated my career to it. But I also believe that system must work fairly for everyone. She paused and looked around the courtroom. Every parent who stands in this courtroom deserves the same respect I should have received from the beginning. Whether they're a Harvard graduate or a high school dropout, whether they wear expensive suits or shop at discount stores, they deserve to have their cases heard fairly. The people in the courtroom began to nod in agreement. Maria wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every parent who had been treated unfairly by the system. Your Honor, Maria said, I request that you make your decision based on the evidence I've presented, not on any assumptions about who I am or what I'm capable of. Judge Harrison realized he was sweating. He looked at all the documents Maria had presented, professional, thorough, convincing evidence that he had refused to consider earlier. Carlos's lawyer stood up nervously. Your Honor, if I may request a brief recess to review this new information? New information, Maria said sharply. Your Honor, none of this information is new. I tried to present all of these documents at the beginning of the hearing. I was interrupted and dismissed before I could share any evidence. Judge Harrison knew she was right. He had cut her off, repeatedly refusing to look at her evidence because he had already made up his mind about her. Ms. Wilson, Judge Harrison said to Carlos's lawyer, do you have any evidence to contradict what Ms. Rodriguez has presented? The lawyer shuffled through her papers nervously. Well, Your Honor, we have testimony about Mr. Martinez's improved financial situation. Financial situation is not the primary factor in custody decisions, Maria interjected. The law is clear that custody should be awarded based on the best interests of the child, not the wealth of the parents. She was absolutely right, and everyone in the room knew it. Judge Harrison looked at Carlos. Mr. Martinez, after hearing this evidence about your daughter's well-being, do you still wish to pursue this custody modification? Carlos looked at his new wife Jennifer, who was sitting in the gallery. She nodded. encouragingly, clearly expecting him to continue the fight. But Carlos looked at Sofia, who was sitting quietly next to Maria. His daughter looked happy and secure with her mother. She wasn't showing any signs of distress or neglect. "Your Honor," Carlos said slowly, I need to think about this." Jennifer's face showed her disappointment, but Carlos was starting to realize that this case was about his daughter's well-being, not about winning or losing. Judge Harrison sat back in his chair, completely overwhelmed by how wrong he had been about everything. The woman he had dismissed as ignorant had just given one of the most professional legal presentations he had ever heard. More importantly, he realized that Maria Rodriguez was right about everything, not just the law, but about fairness and respect and how people should be treated in his courtroom. The morning sun was still shining through the windows, but Judge Harrison felt like he was sitting in the darkness of his own shame and embarrassment. The news of what happened in Judge Harrison's courtroom spread like wildfire through the legal community. By the end of that day, lawyers all over the city were talking about the Harvard-educated public defender who had been humiliated by a judge, based on her appearance. Maria returned to work the next day at the federal public defender's office. Her colleagues had already heard the story and were both shocked and supportive. "Maria, I can't believe Harrison treated you like that," said David Chen, her supervisor. "We've had complaints about his bias before, but nothing this obvious." "What are you going to do about it?" asked Sarah Williams, another public defender who worked in Maria's office. Maria had been thinking about that question all night. Part of her wanted to just forget the whole thing and move on with her life. After all, she had won the custody case. Judge Harrison had ultimately ruled in her favor, stating that Sofia should remain with her mother. But Maria couldn't stop thinking about all the other parents who might face the same treatment. How many good parents had lost their children because they couldn't afford nice clothes or expensive lawyers? How many people had been intimidated into silence by judges who abused their power? "I'm going to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Board," Maria announced. Her colleagues nodded approvingly. "Good," said David. "What Harrison did was completely unacceptable. Judges are supposed to be impartial." Maria spent the next few days writing a detailed complaint. She described everything that had happened in the courtroom, from Judge Harrison's interruptions to his insulting comments about people like her. She included witness statements from several people who had been present during the hearing. The most damaging evidence was the court transcript. Every word Judge Harrison had said was recorded by the court reporter. When read in black and white, his bias was undeniable. Within a week, the story had caught the attention of local news media. A reporter from Channel 7 News called Maria's office. "Ms. Rodriguez, we'd like to interview you about what happened in Judge Harrison's courtroom. Would you be willing to speak on camera?" Maria hesitated. She didn't want to become a public figure or turn this into a circus, but she realized that speaking out might help other people who had faced similar treatment. "I'll do the interview," she said, "but I want to focus on the bigger issues, not just my personal experience." The interview aired on the evening news 3 days later. Maria spoke calmly and professionally about the importance of judicial fairness and equal treatment under the law. "What happened to me was wrong," she said to the reporter, "but I was lucky. I had the education and knowledge to stand up for myself. Many parents in similar situations don't have those advantages. They might give up or accept unfair treatment because they don't know their rights." The interview had a powerful impact. The news station received dozens of calls from viewers who had experienced similar treatment in family court. Some shared stories of losing custody of their children to wealthier ex-spouses despite being good parents. The State Bar Association announced that they would be conducting their own investigation into Judge Harrison's conduct. The Judicial Conduct Board accelerated their review process. Judge Harrison, meanwhile, was facing the worst crisis of his career. Other judges were avoiding him at the courthouse. Lawyers were requesting that their cases be moved to different courtrooms. His reputation was in ruins. A week after the news interview, Judge Harrison received a call from his supervisor, Chief Judge Margaret Thompson. "Bill, we need to talk," she said. "Can you come to my office?" Judge Harrison knew this conversation was coming, but he still dreaded it. He walked slowly to the chief judge's office, feeling older than his 58 years. Sit down, Bill, Chief Judge Thompson said. She was a woman in her 60s who had known Harrison for many years. I've reviewed the complaint against you and watched the news interview. This is serious. Margaret, I know I made mistakes, but… Mistakes? Chief Judge Thompson interrupted. Bill, you humiliated a Harvard law graduate based on her appearance. You questioned her fitness as a mother without looking at any evidence. You threatened to hold her in contempt for asking you to follow proper procedures. Judge Harrison looked down at his hands. When it was laid out like that, his behavior sounded even worse. The Judicial Conduct Board has already made their preliminary decision, Chief Judge Thompson continued. You're going to be formally censured. You'll have to attend bias training and sensitivity counseling. There will also be a letter of reprimand in your permanent file. Judge Harrison nodded. He had expected as much. But that's not all, the chief judge said. Several civil rights organizations are now looking into your past cases. They want to see if there's a pattern of discriminatory behavior. This was what Judge Harrison feared most. He thought back over his 20 years on the bench. How many times had he made assumptions about people based on their appearance? How many cases had he decided unfairly? Margaret, what should I do? Honestly, Bill, I think you should consider retiring. This scandal isn't going away. Every case you handle from now on will be scrutinized. Lawyers will challenge your decisions based on claims of bias. Judge Harrison felt his world crumbling around him. Just a week ago, he had been a respected judge with a solid reputation. Now his career was effectively over. But the consequences extended beyond just Judge Harrison. The legal community was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about bias in the justice system. The State Bar Association announced new training requirements for all judges regarding unconscious bias and fair treatment. They also established a hotline for people to report judicial misconduct. Maria's story sparked a broader conversation about equality in the courtroom. Law schools began including more coursework about bias and discrimination. Civil rights organizations used her case as an example of why judicial reform was necessary. 3 weeks after the incident, Maria received an unexpected phone call at her office. Ms. Rodriguez, this is Judge Harrison. Maria was surprised. She hadn't spoken to him since the day of the hearing. I'm calling to apologize, Judge Harrison said. His voice sounded tired and defeated. What I did to you was inexcusable. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I treated you with disrespect that no one should face in a courtroom. Maria listened quietly. I've been thinking a lot about my career, Judge Harrison continued. About how many times I might have treated other people unfairly without even realizing it. Your case opened my eyes to things I didn't want to see about myself. Judge Harrison, Maria said carefully, I appreciate you calling, but an apology to me isn't enough. You need to think about all the other parents and families you might have affected over the years. I know, he said. That's why I'm planning to retire early. But before I do, I want to make amends. I was wondering, would you consider letting me volunteer with your organization? I know you do pro bono work helping families navigate the legal system. Maria was shocked by the request. You want to volunteer with us? I know it sounds strange, but maybe I could use my experience to help train other judges about bias. Maybe I could help families prepare for court so they don't face what you faced. Maria thought about it for a moment. It was an unusual request, but it showed that Judge Harrison was serious about making changes. Let me think about it, she said. After she hung up the phone, Maria sat quietly in her office. The whole experience had been painful and humiliating, but it had also led to positive changes. Maybe some good could come from Judge Harrison's offer to help. Outside her window, the city continued its daily rhythm. In courtrooms across the city, judges were making decisions that would affect families' lives. Maria hoped that her experience would make those decisions a little more fair for everyone involved. The fight for justice was far from over, but at least now, more people were paying attention. 3 months after the incident in Judge Harrison's courtroom, the formal hearing of the Judicial Conduct Board took place. Maria sat in the hearing room, watching as Judge Harrison faced the consequences of his actions. The board consisted of 5 members, 3 judges, 1 lawyer, and 1 citizen representative. They had spent weeks reviewing the evidence, including the court transcript, witness statements, and video footage from the courtroom's security cameras. "Judge Harrison," said the chairwoman of the board, "after careful review of all evidence, we find that your conduct toward Ms. Rodriguez was inappropriate and violated several principles of judicial ethics." Judge Harrison sat quietly, accepting their decision. "You demonstrated clear bias based on socioeconomic status and appearance. You failed to provide due process by refusing to review evidence. You created a hostile environment that was detrimental to the interests of justice." The board's decision was unanimous. Judge Harrison received a formal censure, the most serious punishment short of removal from office. He was required to complete 40 hours of bias training and undergo professional counseling. A letter of reprimand would remain in his permanent file. More importantly, the board recommended that all family court judges in the state receive additional training on bias and fair treatment. Judge Harrison stood to address the board. "I accept full responsibility for my actions. What I did was wrong, and I have no excuse for it. I have decided to retire from the bench effective next month." Maria felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but a career had ended. She hoped that Judge Harrison would use this experience to help others avoid the same mistakes. After the hearing, Maria walked outside into the bright sunlight. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her supervisor at the public defender's office. "The nonprofit paperwork is approved. Congratulations." Maria smiled. In the weeks following the incident, she had decided to start a nonprofit organization called Equal Justice Advocates. The organization would provide free legal assistance to parents facing discrimination in family court. She had been working on the project during her evenings and weekends, with help from colleagues and volunteers. Several lawyers had offered to donate their time. A local law school had agreed to provide student volunteers. The first office for Equal Justice Advocates was small, just 3 rooms in a downtown building, but it was a start. 2 weeks later, Maria was at her new office when she heard a knock on the door. She opened it to find Judge Harrison standing in the hallway, wearing casual clothes instead of his judicial robes. "Ms. Rodriguez, I hope you don't mind me stopping by." "Judge Harrison, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to follow up on my offer to volunteer. I've completed my bias training and I've been thinking about how I could help." Maria studied his face. He looked different somehow, humbler, less certain of himself. "What did you have in mind?" "I thought I could help train parents for court appearances. I could teach them what to expect, how to present their cases, what judges are looking for. Who better than someone who's been on the other side?" It was an interesting proposal. "And why would you want to do this?" Judge Harrison was quiet for a moment. "Because I need to make amends. Not just to you, but to everyone I might have treated unfairly over the years. I can't undo the past, but maybe I can help prevent future injustices." Maria considered his offer carefully. "If you're serious about this, you'll need to understand something. The families we help are exactly the kind of people you used to dismiss. Poor families, single mothers, people who can't afford nice clothes or expensive lawyers." "I understand that," Judge Harrison said. "That's exactly why I want to help them." Maria made a decision. "All right, we'll try it. But you'll be working under my supervision, and if any families feel uncomfortable with your presence, you'll step back." Agreed. And so began an unlikely partnership. Judge Harrison started volunteering at Equal Justice Advocates 2 days a week. At first, some families were suspicious of him, but gradually they saw that he was genuinely trying to help. He taught parents how to organize their evidence, how to speak clearly in court, and how to stay calm under pressure. He shared insights about what judges expected and how the legal system really worked. "Remember," he would tell nervous parents, "you have the right to be heard. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong in that courtroom." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The judge who had once dismissed people based on their appearance was now teaching them to demand respect in court. 6 months after starting Equal Justice Advocates, Maria received a call that made her smile. "Ms. Rodriguez, This is Jennifer Martinez, Carlos's wife. Maria was surprised to hear from her. I wanted to thank you, Jennifer continued. What happened in that courtroom made Carlos and me realize that we were wrong to try to take Sophia away from you. We can see how much she loves you and how well you take care of her. Thank you for saying that, Jennifer. We'd like to work out a better visitation schedule that works for everyone. Carlos wants to be a good father to Sophia, but we understand that you're her primary parent. It was exactly what Maria had hoped for from the beginning, a solution that put Sophia's needs first. The organization continued to grow. Within a year, equal justice advocates had helped over 200 families navigate the court system. They had won 85% of their cases, and more importantly, they had ensured that all their clients were treated with dignity and respect. Maria often worked late into the evening, but she loved what she was doing. One night, as she was reviewing case files, Sophia came into her office. Mama, why do you work so much? Maria pulled her daughter onto her lap. I'm helping other mamas and papas who need help in court. Remember when we went to see the judge? Sophia nodded. The mean judge. Well, he's not mean anymore. He helps us now. And we help other families so they don't have to be scared like we were. That's good, Mama. Yes, sweetheart. It is good. Maria looked around her office. The walls were covered with thank you letters from families they had helped. Photos of happy children who got to stay with loving parents. Certificates recognizing their work from various legal organizations. Judge Harrison appeared in the doorway. Maria, I'm heading out. Tomorrow's training session is all set up. Thank you, Bill. Over the months, they had moved to a first-name basis. No, thank you. This work, it's given me a chance to be the kind of judge I should have been all along. After he left, Maria sat quietly with Sophia on her lap. She thought about that day, in court when everything had seemed hopeless. When a judge had tried to make her feel small and worthless based on nothing but her appearance. That experience had been painful, but it had led to something beautiful. It had forced important conversations about fairness and justice. It had created an organization that was helping hundreds of families. Most importantly, it had shown that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, can create positive change. Sophia fell asleep in Maria's arms as the sun set outside their office window. Maria held her daughter close and thought about all the children who would benefit from the work they were doing. Justice, she had learned, wasn't just about winning or losing in court. It was about ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, their appearance, or their bank account, had an equal chance to be heard. And that was exactly what Equal Justice Advocates was fighting for, one family at a time. The story of Maria Rodriguez and Judge Harrison became a case study in law schools across the country. It was used to teach future lawyers and judges about the importance of checking their biases and treating everyone with respect. But for Maria, the most important outcome was much simpler. Sophia continued to thrive in her mother's care, growing up in a world where her mother's work was making the justice system a little more fair for everyone. That, Maria thought, was the best victory of all.